got it from his mother. Norman Bates no longer exists. He only half existed to begin with.
Psycho wasn't just Alfred Hitchcock's most profitable film. It was a cinematic revolution that forever altered how movies were made, marketed, and experienced. Behind those screeching violins and that iconic shower scene lurked production nightmares, studio battles, and psychological warfare. Hitchcock of suspense didn't just make a thriller. He orchestrated a cultural earthquake whose aftershocks we still feel today. Here are 20 weird facts about Psycho that will change how you see this groundbreaking masterpiece. And stick around for our bonus fact. Hit that play button and prepare to never look at your shower the same way again. 1. Hitchcock bought the rights to Psycho for just $9,000, then launched a secret mission to hide its ending. After securing Robert Bloch's novel for a pittance, Hitchcock didn't celebrate. He panicked. The director didn't want anyone knowing the film's shocking twist before release. It wasn't enough to secure the rights. He needed to erase the novel from public consciousness. Hitchcock dispatched his assistants to bookstores across America with a ruthless directive: buy every copy of Psycho they could find. This wasn't standard marketing. It was literary suppression on an unprecedented scale. The director even had his secretary track down everyone who had borrowed the novel from libraries, personally calling to beg their silence. When Paramount executives finally demanded to read the source material, Hitchcock claimed copies were impossible to find because he had methodically removed them from circulation. The studio had no choice but to trust his vision, never knowing their director had orchestrated one of Hollywood's first spoiler prevention campaigns, decades before internet culture made such concerns mainstream. 2. The shower scene took 7 days to film but lasts only 45 seconds on screen. Hitchcock didn't film a murder scene. He dissected the very concept of cinematic violence. For 1 week in December 1959, Stage 18 at Universal Studios transformed into a clinical laboratory of fear. 70 camera setups, 78 pieces of film, meticulous storyboards sketching every angle, every cut, every moment of implied brutality. Janet Leigh stood under ice-cold water for hours, her skin pruning, her body exhausted. Not because Hitchcock was cruel, though he certainly could be, but because warm water wouldn't photograph properly under the harsh lights. The knife never touches flesh. On screen, not once. Yet audiences were convinced they'd witnessed explicit violence. When the scene was first shown to executives, one Paramount official was so disturbed he refused to return to work the following day. The shower scene wasn't just movie magic. It was psychological reprogramming that taught audiences to fear the mundane, the simple act of bathing, by using rapid editing to bypass rational thought and strike directly at the primitive brain. 3. The blood swirling down the drain wasn't blood at all. It was chocolate syrup. In 1960, blood on film looked fake, painfully, distractingly fake. The thin, bright red theatrical blood Hollywood relied on photographed terribly in black and white, appearing more like watery paint than the visceral fluid Hitchcock required. The solution wasn't in the special effects department. It was in the craft services tent. Bosco chocolate syrup, thick, dark, and viscous, created the perfect visual illusion when photographed in stark monochrome. The swirling darkness circling the drain became one of cinema's most memorable images. Yet, audiences were actually watching dessert toppings. Janet Leigh later recalled the surreal experience. There I was, naked under a torn shower curtain with chocolate sauce running down my legs. This wasn't mere practicality. It was Hitchcock's twisted genius, finding the macabre within the mundane. Even more disturbing, the same chocolate syrup technique would be used for decades afterward, meaning that some of cinema's most horrifying moments were created with the same substance mothers were stirring into their children's milk. 4. Paramount Studios refused to finance Psycho, forcing Hitchcock to mortgage his own home. Studio executives didn't reject Psycho. They recoiled from it. Hitchcock wants to make a nasty little film about a motel keeper who spies on guests and stabs a naked woman in the shower. One Paramount memo circulated. The response was unified. Absolutely not. But Hitchcock wouldn't be denied. The director didn't beg. He gambled everything. Hitchcock mortgaged his colonial-style home in Bel Air for $500,000, nearly $5 million today, to self-finance the film. In exchange for Paramount's distribution, he waived his standard director's fee for 60% ownership of the negative. Studio heads smirked at what they saw as financial suicide. Hitchcock shot the film for just $806,947, using his television crew from Alfred Hitchcock Presents rather than more expensive film personnel. The result? When Psycho grossed over $50 million worldwide, equivalent to about $468 million today, Hitchcock became one of the wealthiest directors in Hollywood history. His willingness to risk personal bankruptcy didn't just get the film made, it reinvented how directors could leverage their power against studio systems that had controlled Hollywood for decades. 5. Hitchcock banned moviegoers from entering theaters after the film had started. No one will be admitted to the theater after the start of each performance of Psycho. This wasn't a polite request, it was a revolutionary decree. Theater ushers literally locked the doors once the film began, stationing guards to enforce Hitchcock's unprecedented policy. Moviegoers, accustomed to casual, continuous performance policies where they could wander in at any time, found themselves confronted by life-sized cardboard cutouts of Hitchcock pointing to his watch. The director didn't implement this rule to be difficult. He was protecting the viewing experience with military precision. Lines stretched around blocks. Audiences arrived hours early. Psycho didn't just change movies, it transformed how we watch them. Hitchcock personally recorded the announcement played before screenings. The manager of this theater has been instructed, at the risk of his life, not to admit anyone after the picture starts. This wasn't mere marketing. It was behavioral conditioning that trained audiences to respect narrative integrity in ways we now take for granted. Modern theaters still enforce similar policies for major releases, little knowing they're following a playbook written by Hitchcock in 1960. 6. The infamous toilet flush in Psycho was the first ever shown in American cinema. That porcelain throne wasn't just bathroom furniture, it was a cultural battlefield. When Marion Crane tears up incriminating paper and flushes it away, Hitchcock wasn't merely advancing the plot, he was shattering a puritanical Hollywood taboo that had stood for decades. The Motion Picture Production Code, which governed film content since 1934, explicitly prohibited showing toilets or their functions. Censors erupted in outrage. They demanded cuts. They threatened ratings penalties. Hitchcock didn't back down. He insisted the flush was essential to the narrative, the physical evidence of Marion's crime disappearing down the drain. The small moment represents much more than scrap paper being disposed of. It marked the beginning of Hollywood's confrontation with realistic human behavior. The flush heard around the world didn't just push boundaries, it demolished them. Within years, the production code would collapse entirely, replaced by the rating system we know today. Every R-rated film, every boundary-pushing scene in modern cinema owes a debt to that single, defiant flush. 7. Janet Leigh was so traumatized by filming the shower scene that she avoided showers for the rest of her life. The actress didn't just act terror, she absorbed it. After filming completed, Janet Leigh returned home forever changed. The woman who had confidently bathed throughout her life suddenly couldn't bear the vulnerability of a shower. For decades afterward, she took only baths, and even then, only with the bathroom door locked, the house doors locked, and the windows secured. "I cannot take a shower," she admitted in interviews years later. "It's not a phobia, it's just that I get no relaxation in a shower." When staying in hotels, she would secure the bathroom door with a chair. If forced to shower, she would leave the curtain open, facing outward the entire time. Hitchcock hadn't merely directed a horror sequence, he had implanted genuine trauma in his leading lady that persisted for the remaining 44 years of her life. The psychological toll wasn't accidental. It was precisely what Hitchcock intended, to create such visceral horror that it would permanently alter human behavior. Millions of viewers similarly developed shower phobias after seeing the film, proving that Psycho's real achievement wasn't just frightening audiences for 2 hours, it was reprogramming their relationship with everyday activities forever. 8. Anthony Perkins wasn't allowed to do Norman Bates's cross-dressing scenes. A body double was secretly used. The shocking revelation that Norman dressed as his mother wasn't just a plot twist, it was a closely guarded production secret. Despite playing the character, Anthony Perkins never wore the dress, wig, or makeup for those fleeting glimpses of mother during the film. Hitchcock judged Perkins too tall and distinctively male to be convincing, even in silhouette or quick cuts. Instead, he secretly cast Margot Epper, a professional stuntwoman, to embody mother's physicality. This wasn't merely practicality, it was calculated misdirection. By using a female body double, Hitchcock created genuine visual confusion that reinforced the film's shocking twist. Even more surprising, Perkins wasn't even on set when the shower scene was filmed. The actor was in New York preparing for a Broadway show Psycho, meaning the film's most iconic murder sequence features a character whose actual performer was nowhere near the set. This deliberate deception extended beyond production. In all promotional materials and interviews, Hitchcock forbade any mention of body doubles, maintaining the illusion that Perkins had portrayed all aspects of this complex character, when in reality, the actor never once donned the infamous dress. 9. The film's most terrifying sound effect came from a cassava melon being stabbed. The sound that makes audiences flinch wasn't created with sophisticated audio equipment. It was made with groceries. Hitchcock's sound designers faced an impossible challenge. What does a knife-piercing human flesh actually sound like? The answer came from the produce section. After testing various watermelons, grapefruits, and other vegetation, they discovered that a cassava melon, when stabbed forcefully with a butcher knife, produced the perfect combination of resistance and wetness. The recording session resembled a bizarre culinary massacre. Sound technicians positioned microphones within inches of the melons, then repeatedly plunged knives into the flesh at different angles and speeds. The final mix layered these agricultural stabbings with Janet Leigh's screams to create what film historians now recognize as the most influential sound design in horror history. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because we're about to reveal even wilder production secrets in our next 10 facts, including the disturbing psychological games Hitchcock played with his cast to achieve authentic terror on screen. For every moment of fear you've experienced watching Psycho, there was an equally disturbing reality occurring behind the camera. 10. Hitchcock shot the film in black and white, not for artistic reasons, but to save money and avoid censorship. The stark monochrome imagery wasn't an aesthetic choice, it was strategic deception. By 1960, color filmmaking had become Hollywood's standard, with nearly all major productions shooting in vibrant Technicolor. Yet Hitchcock deliberately regressed to black and white, not for nostalgia, not for artistic expression, for manipulation. The director recognized two crucial advantages. First, his modest $806,947 budget would stretch significantly further without color processing costs. Second, and far more calculating, he knew censors would object less strenuously to the shower scene's violence when rendered in grayscale rather than bloody crimson. The blood going down the drain wouldn't have been nearly as effective in color, Hitchcock later admitted, but this wasn't the full truth. His private correspondence reveals he feared the film might not be released at all if the brutal stabbing had been shown in full color. The decision wasn't just financially prudent, it was psychologically sophisticated. The high contrast black and white created a documentary-like quality that made the horror feel more immediate, more realistic, as though audiences were watching genuine footage rather than cinematic fiction. What began as a practical compromise became Psycho's defining visual signature. 11. Bernard Herrmann's iconic screeching violin score was originally supposed to have no music at all. The piercing strings that became synonymous with murder weren't in Hitchcock's original vision. The director wanted silence, complete, unsettling silence. Hitchcock specifically instructed composer Bernard Herrmann to leave the shower scene unscored, believing the natural sounds of running water and screams would be more disturbing. Herrmann didn't just disagree, he revolted. While Hitchcock was away from the studio, the composer secretly recorded and added the now famous screaming violins motif, harsh, stabbing notes played by string instruments with their bows striking rather than gliding across strings. When Hitchcock returned to review the footage, he was initially furious at this insubordination. Then he saw the scene with music. His response was immediate. Herrmann's salary was doubled. The screeching strings, technically called col legno playing, transformed a disturbing scene into a cultural touchstone. The musical sequence requires violinists to use their bows in ways that risk damaging expensive instruments, creating sounds that neurologically trigger human fear. Responses by mimicking primal screams. Herrmann's defiance didn't just enhance the film, it revolutionized horror scoring, influencing everything from The Exorcist to Jaws to Stranger Things. 12. The Bates Motel and house still stand on the Universal Studios lot, essentially unchanged since 1960. This wasn't just a film set, it became a shrine to cinematic terror. While most movie locations are dismantled after production wraps, the Bates Motel has remained standing for over 6 decades. The facade isn't tucked away in some forgotten corner. It occupies prime real estate on the Universal Studios backlot, visible to thousands of tourists daily. The motel's exterior remains almost exactly as it appeared in 1960, with 12 rooms arranged in an L shape. though only 2 actually contain functional interiors. The imposing Victorian mansion looming above it has become perhaps cinema's most recognizable haunted house, despite never actually containing any supernatural elements. What visitors don't realize is how deliberately deceptive this location is. The house was built at 3/4 scale to make it appear more imposing against the horizon, employing the same forced perspective techniques used in Disneyland's castles. The structures have survived multiple studio fires, renovation plans, and backlot reorganizations, preserved not just as a tourist attraction, but as a physical monument to Psycho's enduring cultural significance. In a town that routinely destroys its history, the Bates property's survival represents Hollywood's rare acknowledgement of architectural cinematic heritage. 13. The film's iconic poster image of Janet Leigh in her bra was considered so scandalous that many newspapers refused to print it. The marketing image wasn't just provocative, it was revolutionary. In 1960, mainstream advertising simply didn't show women in their undergarments. The poster, featuring Janet Leigh seated on a bed in a white bra and slip with John Gavin standing shirtless behind her, ignited immediate controversy. Dozens of major newspapers across America refused to run the advertisements. The Chicago Tribune demanded a modified version with Leigh's shoulders covered. The Los Angeles Times would only print it in reduced size. But Hitchcock anticipated this reaction. In fact, he counted on it. The director personally supervised the photo shoot, positioning Leigh precisely to maximize the suggestion of post-coital vulnerability. The rejection by moral guardians generated exactly the word-of-mouth publicity Hitchcock desired. When theaters displayed the full poster in their lobbies, attendance skyrocketed, particularly among young adults eager to see what had provoked such outrage. The marketing wasn't just selling a thriller, it was announcing a cultural shift. By today's standards, the image appears remarkably tame, but its impact permanently altered how films could be promoted. Every provocative movie poster that followed, from The Graduate to Basic Instinct, walked through the door that Psycho's controversial advertisement had forced open. 14. Hitchcock used real-life serial killer Ed Gein as inspiration, but hid this fact from the studio. The horror in Psycho wasn't conjured from pure imagination. It was pulled from police reports. Ed Gein, Wisconsin's Plainfield ghoul who was arrested in 1957, had shocked America by preserving his dead mother's bedroom exactly as it was during her life, speaking to her as though still alive, and eventually exhuming female corpses to create furniture and clothing from their skin. These weren't just similarities to Norman Bates. They were the blueprint. Robert Bloch's novel explicitly drew from newspaper coverage of Gein's crimes, but Hitchcock deliberately obscured these connections when pitching to Paramount. Studio memos reveal executives had no idea they were financing a film inspired by actual murders that had occurred just 3 years earlier. When questioned about the source material, Hitchcock would vaguely reference psychological case studies. This wasn't just marketing discretion, it was calculated misdirection. By distancing Psycho from its true inspiration, Hitchcock could present the film as fictional entertainment rather than exploitation of recent tragedies. The director even instructed Anthony Perkins to avoid researching Gein, fearing the actor might become too disturbed by the similarities. Only years later did Hitchcock acknowledge the connection, noting that truth is always more terrible than fiction. 15. Janet Leigh received threatening letters for years from viewers who believed she deserved her character's fate. The letters arrived for decades. Handwritten, often anonymous, they shared a disturbing theme. Marion Crane deserved to die. Hundreds of viewers, unable to separate fiction from moral judgment, sent messages expressing satisfaction that a woman who stole money and had an affair was appropriately punished. Leigh kept these letters private for years, revealing their existence only in her 1995 memoir. The correspondence wasn't just unsettling, it revealed Psycho's unprecedented psychological impact. The film hadn't just frightened audiences, it had rewired their moral compasses. Hitchcock had deliberately structured the film to make viewers complicit in Marion's crime, following her as the protagonist for the first third of the story, only to abruptly punish this investment with her shocking death. This narrative bait and switch left audiences psychologically disoriented, with many subconsciously transferring their guilt onto the character. The letters contained phrases like, "Women who steal must be cleansed," and "the shower washed away your sins." Some even included detailed descriptions of the writer's own shower routines, suggesting disturbing fantasies. Leigh eventually stopped opening fan mail altogether, telling friends, "After a while, you realize some people are watching the movie every day, and they're not watching it for the plot." 16. Hitchcock used ice-cold cold water in the shower scene to make Janet Leigh's reactions more authentic. The terror on screen wasn't entirely acting. It was induced. When Janet Leigh stepped into the Bates Motel shower, she expected the standard Hollywood comfort, warm water carefully regulated by stagehands. What she received was a shocking blast of near-freezing water that Hitchcock had secretly ordered. The director didn't warn his actress. He ambushed her. The genuine gasps and shudders visible in the final cut aren't performance. They're authentic physical reactions to unexpected cold. This wasn't mere directorial cruelty. It was calculated psychological manipulation. Hitchcock knew that warm water would create a relaxed, comfortable physical response inconsistent with the terror the scene required. The cold water triggered involuntary muscle tensing and genuine discomfort that registered subliminally to viewers. Leigh later recalled, "It was supposed to be a warm shower, but Alfred wanted the real shock of cold on my skin. He said, 'Your reaction will be more natural.'" This technique, manipulating actors without their knowledge to capture authentic responses, became a signature Hitchcock method, one that many actors refused to work with him again after experiencing. Modern directors who employ similar tactics are often criticized for emotional abuse, yet Hitchcock's methods continue to be celebrated as the price of cinematic perfection. 17. The Motion Picture Association tried to ban the film completely over the toilet scene, not the violence. The censors didn't object to murder, they objected to plumbing. When Hitchcock submitted Psycho for approval, the Production Code Administration's primary objection wasn't the shower stabbing, the voyeurism, or even Janet Leigh's partial nudity. It was the shot of a toilet being flushed. Jeffrey Sherlock, the code's administrator, wrote, "The toilet scene must be removed entirely. The American public is not prepared to see bathroom fixtures in entertainment." Hitchcock didn't argue ethics or art. He deployed legal precision. The director pointed out that the production code's specific wording prohibited showing toilets, not the sound of flushing. He agreed to remove the shot of the toilet bowl, but insisted on keeping the audio and the tank visible. This bizarre negotiation over bathroom etiquette, while a film depicting brutal murder was otherwise approved, revealed the absurd priorities of 1960s censorship. The compromise wasn't just a technical victory, it was the beginning of the production code's collapse. Within a decade, the arbitrary and often illogical restrictions would be abandoned entirely in favor of the rating system. The toilet flush in Psycho doesn't just dispose of plot evidence, it symbolically flushed away decades of puritanical censorship that had constrained American cinema. 18. Hitchcock used a body double for Leigh's shower scene, but deliberately spread misinformation that it was all Janet. The nudity that shocked 1960s America wasn't Janet Leigh at all. It was professional model Marley Renfro, hired for $500 to stand in for the shower sequence. Yet for decades, the public believed they had seen the Hollywood star exposed. This wasn't accidental confusion, it was strategic deception. Hitchcock orchestrated an elaborate misinformation campaign, having Leigh give detailed interviews about the exhausting experience of filming the scene herself. The director understood that the scene's power partially derived from audiences believing they were seeing a vulnerable Hollywood star, not an anonymous model. The truth remained hidden for decades. Renfro herself was contractually forbidden from discussing her involvement until the late 1990s. When the truth finally emerged, film scholars were forced to reevaluate their analysis of the sequence. What makes this manipulation particularly noteworthy is that even the body double wasn't truly nude. Renfro wore flesh-colored moleskin patches during filming. The scene that launched 1,000 censorship battles and forever changed depictions of violence against women on screen contained no actual nudity at all. Instead, it was assembled through 78 camera setups and editing techniques specifically designed to suggest explicit content that wasn't actually filmed. 19. Hitchcock demanded theaters drastically increase their security due to his fear of copycat killers. The security protocols weren't normal promotional stunts. They were born of genuine fear. As Psycho's release approached, Hitchcock became increasingly concerned about the film's potential psychological impact. He didn't just request additional theater security, he mandated it. Theaters screening the film were required to hire additional guards, position them throughout the auditorium, and have personnel regularly patrol restrooms. The director feared not just audience fainting, which occurred regularly during screenings, but that the film might inspire real-world violence. In a private memo to theater owners, Hitchcock wrote, "The power of suggestion within this film should not be underestimated. Audiences leaving in a state of shock must be monitored for their safety and the safety of others." This wasn't mere paranoia. The film's realistic portrayal of seemingly motiveless murder represented a new paradigm in cinematic violence. While previous movie killers had clear motivations, greed, revenge, jealousy, Norman Bates represented something more disturbing: psychological compulsion disconnected from rational purpose. The security measures weren't just protective, they were acknowledgement that Psycho had crossed a threshold where cinema could potentially influence disturbed minds. Hitchcock's concern proved prescient. In the decades that followed, multiple real-life killers would indeed cite Psycho as inspiration. 20. The film's original score was almost entirely performed by string instruments because the budget couldn't afford a full orchestra. The musical restraint wasn't artistic minimalism, it was financial necessity. When Bernard Herrmann agreed to score Psycho, he discovered the music budget had been slashed to less than a third of Hitchcock's previous films. A full orchestra was financially impossible. Rather than compromise with synthesized sounds or a smaller, unbalanced orchestra, Herrmann made a revolutionary decision. He would compose exclusively for string instruments. The result wasn't a limitation, it was a revelation, the composer later explained. I wrote the score for strings only, as I felt that a black and white film required a black and white sound. The string-only approach created a sonic landscape of singular intensity, cold, harsh, and unnervingly monochromatic. The infamous shower scene music, technically titled The Murder, uses violins not to create melody, but to simulate screams through a technique called glissandi, rapid sliding between notes. Contemporary audiences found the score so disturbing that numerous viewers reported experiencing physical symptoms during screenings: cold sweats, elevated heart rates, and even temporary hearing sensitivity. What began as a budgetary constraint transformed film scoring forever. Herrmann's work demonstrated that orchestral limitation could enhance psychological impact, influencing generations of composers from John Williams to Hans Zimmer, who continue to cite Psycho's score as a masterclass in doing more with less. Bonus fact: the sacrifice wasn't voluntary, it was commanded. As Psycho approached release, Anthony Perkins prepared for the standard publicity circuit: talk shows, magazine interviews, press conferences. Then came Hitchcock's decree: absolute silence. Perkins was forbidden from participating in any promotion whatsoever. The director didn't request this. He enforced it, inserting a non-promotion clause into Perkins' contract with substantial financial penalties for violations. Hitchcock's reasoning was ruthlessly practical. Any appearance by Perkins might suggest his character's importance and hint at the film's twist, but the consequences for the actor proved devastating. Unlike Janet Leigh, who received an Oscar nomination and career boost from her role, Perkins found himself systematically erased from his own success. The professional damage wasn't temporary, it was permanent. Perkins was immediately typecast, losing numerous leading man roles because directors feared audiences would only see Norman Bates. The actor later lamented, "I was a leading man type for 10 years before Psycho, but couldn't get arrested afterward." Despite appearing in over 50 subsequent films, Perkins never escaped Norman Bates's shadow. When he died in 1992, nearly every headline identified him solely as Psycho actor. His career trajectory represents perhaps the most poignant legacy of Hitchcock's masterpiece: how the brilliance of a single performance can simultaneously create cinematic immortality while destroying an actor's professional future. Psycho wasn't just a thriller that shocked 1960s audiences. It was cinematic rewiring that forever altered how we experience fear. Hitchcock didn't just tell a story, he recalibrated our relationship with the mundane. Showers, motels, quiet men with gentle smiles. Everything ordinary became potentially deadly. The film didn't just influence directors, it transformed audiences into more sophisticated, more paranoid viewers who learned to trust nothing and question everything.